Hello, my name is Alex, and in this video, we'll talk about Azure Unreal Pixel Streaming and its secure deployment using Azure Marketplace item. So before we dive into the security aspects of this Marketplace item deployment, I'd like to make an announce about the Azure Unreal Pixel Streaming Copilot video that will be released soon, that will detail this reference solution architecture using Azure Unreal Pixel Streaming Marketplace item, as well as some of the custom components such as Azure Function Host, and how we took advantage of Azure OpenAI service, including GPT-4, generative AI, and GPT-4 with vision, generative AI models, as well as Azure Speech Service and Azure Speech SDK, including text-to-speech and speech-to-text capabilities to build a fully functioning Copilot with Azure Unreal Pixel Streaming in the browser. The deployment we're referring to uses maker service as well as the signaling server as displayed. Now let's dive into the secure deployment of Azure Unreal Pixel Streaming Marketplace item. First of all, I've got this GoDaddy domain registered with the domain registrar at GoDaddy. Then we'll talk about enabling custom domain using Azure DNS resource for making this happen. Then with GoDaddy, you can procure and purchase a wildcard SSL certificate, which might cost you quite a bit. Instead, for testing purposes, we used OpenSSL, self-signed wildcard certificate, and also we talked about enabling HTTPS and all the dependencies between HTTPS, enabling authentication through signaling server, as well as enabling Azure admin dashboard, and what kind of app registration is needed there, and the dependency upon HTTPS from Azure Speech SDK. So as displayed on the picture here. When you create this self-signed wildcard certificate, we used OpenSSL tool, and it creates the following artifacts, including keys and wildcard certificate file and private and public keys base 64 representation, which is required for you to specify on Azure portal. And because this is a self-signed certificate, it will still show you not secure when you deploy. And we'll talk next about how to actually create a real wildcard certificate with the help of Let's Encrypt. So in this case, similar setup. GoDaddy is a domain register with the domain. We enabling custom domain with Azure DNS resource. This time we're using Let's Encrypt service, which allows you to create a free wildcard certificates valid for 90 days. When you generate this, we used CertBot tool as well as OpenSSL, and then there's still also basically considerations about enabling HTTPS, authentication on the signaling server, enabling admin dashboard, using app registration for that. And then when you, with the CertBot tool, when you produce those artifacts include PEM files for the cert, for the chain, full chain, private key, and then also we used OpenSSL tool to produce a wildcard PFX file, and then also produce client cert PEM and client key PEM files, which will show you where to place and how to make the deployment happen with those artifacts. Also, Michael posted a very nice blog post about walking through this procedure of creating Let's Encrypt certificate on the Windows machine, which we'll drop the link in the description. The commands that we use, so between certbot and OpenSSL tool, and then also in the README for the certbot, you can also find a nice description about all of those different artifacts that will get produced, including certpam, chain PAM, full chain PAM, and private key PAM files. Once deployed, you will get a secure connection, obviously, on your registered domain. Now let's dive into the Unreal Pixel Streaming marketplace item. So just a quick reminder that for unidirectional or bidirectional communication between the website and your Unreal app, it's great to have that allow Unreal pixel streaming commands marked. Then for custom domain, we mark enable, and we specify the DNS resource in Azure, in this case for my domain. For the traffic manager prefix, we specified a string, and then also we enabling HTTPS, which requires us to specify base 64 representation of your public key and the private key, based on what we generated on previous, as was described previously. And then also important here is the enabling authentication signaling server enable. We'll talk about this in more detail, but for now, this is a very important radio button. And the dashboard, on the admin dashboard, you'll be able to create the definition of all of those different users as required. But now let's focus a little bit more about the Azure DNS creation. So this is the article that allows you to create Azure DNS. Pretty straightforward procedure here. What do you want to do? You also want to specify the names, server names in your domain register NS records. And then ultimately, when you deploy, so this is the DNS resource, but when you deploy your Azure Pixel Streaming with all of the infrastructure around Traffic Manager as well as the Matchmaker server, it's going to propagate additional records on your DNS zone that we'll review in a second. Now we see that where to take the name server records from. This is just the name server records on the GoDaddy site that I propagated as NS records on my custom domain. And then once deployed, you'll see that additional records will be created automatically for you. So there's a one, this is for Western Europe deployment, A record, as well as for Matchmaker, and the C name for the Traffic Manager. And when you provide those base 64 representations of the keys, they will be stored in the key vault, and then the key vault will be the supplier for that information for the PAM file creation on the Matchmaker VM, as well as the signaling server instance of a skill set. Now let's talk about the admin dashboard. So when you enable admin dashboard, the system will ask you for an app registration. And when you deploy, this is just an app registration in the Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory. And then once deployed, you have to specify, once you get this dashboard web app propagated and created, you will have to specify the callback URL in regards with that dashboard web app name. So this is back onto the app registration that you specified upon creation, upon deployment of the Azure Marketplace item. Now let's get into the VM. So in this case, just straight in the VM for the instance of the skill set for signaling server, I installed OpenSSL, and I installed the certbot per instructions. So this is the Let's Encrypt website, and the certbot installation instructions. In this case, we specified Windows. And this is that Michael's post that details the process of installation as well as creation of those artifacts. And then this also includes challenge records that you create on the domain register side. But it's pretty straightforward how you create this, and then how you manipulate with the output of this with the help of OpenSSL. So this is what Chatbot produced for my domain in the Chatbot Live folder. There's a nice README that allows you to read about the process and kind of understand better what gets produced as your wildcard certificate gets produced. Then all of those different files will be generated for you, and this is all the PEM files. Later on, when the task scheduler, or you launch the VMSS, the signaling server yourself, or it gets launched for you through Task Manager, those certificates are placed into the certificates folder, as it was shown just a second ago. And then basically, if you look at how the launch takes place, this will be between those files that we just highlighted. And those certificate files are essential for picking up the right certificate for you. Yeah, once everything is in place and you deploy it, then this is the one simple Unreal app running on my domain, www.alexanikiev.dev, and you can see that it's a secure connection certificate, and there's a padlock, and then I'm able to navigate through the space as appropriate. Now let's talk about the enabling authentication and signaling server just a little bit more in detail. So by default, when you enable authentication and signaling server, this uses a connection to matchmaker, and then the matchmaker is connected with blob storage, and then the blob storage stores usernames and passwords and password hashes for you. But sometimes for deployment, when you have a more simplified setup, you may want to do your deployment without matchmaker, just a signaling server, and then you will be connecting to that stream of your choice. And what's important is in the cirrus.js, the WebRTC server, there's a line that basically mandates what to do if use matchmaker equals false. That's our scenario. We want to simplify, and we don't want to go for the login for authentication. We don't want to be using matchmaker, but we want to be using just a signaling server. There's a middleware, authentication middleware, that sits in modules authentication. By the way, this is just a config that is essential. By default, when you deploy, the use matchmaker is true. So after deployment, if you want to RDP to your VM for the simplified setup, and then change use matchmaker to false, and then matchmaker address and matchmaker port will not matter in this case. But we have to do a little bit of a customization to properly take into account the authentication details stored on the signaling server. Or we can organize connection per the default strategy, table storage strategy, from signaling server to blob storage, which I'll highlight a little later. But for now, this is a little API that matchmaker calls and connects with the storage account. But what we want to leverage some of the legacy code in here that allows us to have essentially a JSON file with users on the signaling server, and then take advantage of that instead of going through matchmaker server and the matchmaker connecting to blob storage. So this is what we did. We defined a new strategy, and then basically the only thing left here is to how to propagate those passwords. So in store_password.js, we have basically this guidance about how to propagate that JSON file. And then we place this JSON file into modules authentication DB as a users.json, and then we launch signaling server with the users file argument that I will highlight also explicitly a little later. Once all of those steps are done, so we substituted table storage strategy.js with our own implementation that takes advantage of a user's JSON file. Then enable authentication true, enable HTTP true, and use matchmaker false. Combination gives us this, activates this branch of the logic. And then we basically have this bcrypt compare function, just like it used to be used in the matchmaker plus blob storage configuration for checking the incoming username and password from the website. So how to set up in the matchmaker plus blob storage configuration? Typically, this is how it gets set up. So once you enable the dashboard, admin dashboard under accounts on that web app, you can specify and you can submit your configuration. How does this knows where to store it? So it knows by the connection string, and then basically in the blob storage, we have users table, which has the username and password hash. So this is just a default configuration, which we substituted with a simplified configuration using signaling server and users.json in modules authentication DB users.json. And then if you look at the user.json, you will see that information stored in there. And then when you connect on your endpoint on signaling server, it gives you this login screen first, and then if you log in successfully, then you will be able to proceed to your experience as necessary. The final note will be around how to associate your custom domain with the signaling server endpoint. So you can do it by means of DNS name, fully qualified domain name, or a public IP address. So I basically use the DNS FDQN DNS name, which may look like this. And then I had to modify in GoDaddy domain register. I had to include the CNAME record on www to point this to the right endpoint of the signaling server. And that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you so much for your attention, and stay tuned for the customization and Copilot video, which is going to be pretty awesome.